And there are some elements of it that I think we might want to think about from a policy perspective. One, we need to get schools away from this obsession with inputs and move towards a context where पढ़ने पढ़ाने की बात होती है. And that means that we need to start monitoring differently. India has taken some good steps in that direction recently. The National Assessment Survey finally now is collecting district level data on learning outcomes in linked to a competency framework. I think this is a really important first step. Whatever the limitations may be of the survey, these are problems that could be resolved going forward, but the fact that it's done is very important. Now we need to think about the next step. How do you take the data that you're collecting? How do you take this assessment to use assessment as a diagnostic tool? Because assessment is only useful for me if I know that I can do something with it. Otherwise, I'm learning more about a problem that frankly the system has acknowledged. It's important to keep putting that out in the public domain and reminding ourselves, but it's not going to really make a change in policy. But the fact of that assessment is now a very important first step, because assessments are what you measure after all is what gets done. So it's a very, very crucial first step. How do you convert that assessment into action is really the challenge that we have. And here I will go back to what I said in the previous segments. You need a much more decentralized decision-making architecture, one that goads the system towards considering themselves not passive agents that are responding to orders, but much more as active agents that are taking what they know about the world in which they work and moving that along in a direction of actually achieving something. One way of doing this, or at least creating an atmosphere where this is possible, is if you can create a district level mechanism for districts to set goals and build their own sort of structures and pathways of what it takes to fulfill that goal. Now, nobody really knows what it is that's going to solve this learning crisis in India. You know, you may say public, private, you may say more schools, you may say governance, it's some combination of everything, right? And ultimately, it really is about the classroom. So we need a lot more experimentation, and I think that one way of sort of building this experimentation will be to engage with districts to build their own district specific plans. There we have a huge capacity issue which needs to be considered as government thinks about its training mechanisms. How do you capacitate and train the entire frontline architecture in a way that they are in a position to actually make plans and identify, you know, have the technical expertise to say, these are the pathways that we are going to experiment with. There is that architecture of the SCERTs and the diets that are supposed to provide this. Unfortunately, our diets are moribund. So revitalizing the diets, engaging the administrative part of the education system with the pedagogical part of the education system in a much more robust conversation where NGOs you know, actually provide that technical expertise would, I think, be an important way forward. And it sounds impossible, but it's not completely impossible because this has been done in some places to great success in different contexts. So for example, the government of Kerala in 1997 made this big push towards participatory planning, and there was a lot of training and capacity building. It had its warts, it had its flaws, but a huge attempt was made, and what it did was sort of make Kerala the sort of the real first mover and shaker in decentralized participatory planning in India. But it required a focused, sustained, one-year-long campaign with civil society organizations, with bureaucrats, with technical experts, all coming together to do what in some ways is a harder task, because the Gram Panchayat has to make a plan that is all encompassing and not just focused on a technical plan like that of education. That's the first, that could be an important way of creating an incentive system and a behavioral organizational culture where learning becomes a focus of decision making. The other really important thing that we have found in our work is the system reacts very effectively to mission modes. In fact, I recall some years ago in a conversation with a bureaucrat who said, the problem with us is that we know how to do melas, we know how to do camps, we know how to do missions, but वो mission को everyday में convert करना, वहाँ पे हम fail हो जाते हैं. So the ability to align goals, align funds, align incentives, and get systems moving in this very quick 6-month burst of a mission, summer camps, reading hours, Delhi government did this reading camp where it created a mission that by the 14th of November, 100% students in standard 6 will be able to, will move from non-reader to reader category. They may or may not have achieved that, but it mobilized the whole system in a way that, quick results were shown. And I think if we keep moving in that direction, where teachers also start getting into their own muscle memory starts changing because they keep participating in these missions, that I think may make a big difference to how we think about the classroom and how we think about pedagogy. Last but not the least, assessments are an important part of this story. And by assessments, I don't mean the learning assessments of the NAS kind, I mean how examinations take place inside schools. There again, there needs to be a lot more alignment. I think one of the problems with the education bureaucracy and with attempts to move in the direction of learning is that there are different arms of the bureaucracy, of the education system, and those arms don't often talk to each other. So the pedagogy arm doesn't talk to the planning arm, doesn't talk to the administrative arm, doesn't talk to the monitoring arm, and you sort of end up with little bits and pieces, the training arm, all these little bits and pieces that are operating in these ways. Finally, we need to be able to think about performance and financing. And I'm not talking about performance-based pay. I think that's a different issue. I'm talking about the fiscal transfer system between the center, the states and the local that currently are designed and based entirely on the basis of input. So whatever we have in terms of this national assessment survey and so on and so forth, ultimately DICE data is what determines kitna paisa aayega. Bureaucracies around the world are incentivized by money. Money is power in a bureaucratic setup, and every bureaucracy is trying to move money into their level. We need to think about our central and state schemes in a way that pushes for a much more block grant structure, but one that is linked to some kind of performance function. And that I think would be an interesting and important governance transformation that we can that we can make, taking on board the NAS data, taking on board what Niti Aayog is trying to do with its school quality indicators to try and create a more performance-based fund flow and intergovernmental transfer mechanism, which I think in the long term may again move the needle a little bit in terms of shifting the organizational culture to move away from a focus on inputs to a focus on learning and outcomes, and that itself will then push the system to start looking more carefully at questions of classroom and pedagogy.